I was living in China and I was just noticing that, in China they don't make any bones about the fact that they censor and monitor your internet. And when I came back to the US immediately after that, I began to realize that it's really not that much different. Living in the United States, your internet is absolutely monitored as well. It's just that they don't have this kind of ham-handed, old-school Soviet-style method of tracking and abusing you while you're doing it. Instead, they do something which is much more sophisticated. And so I wanted to write a book about that sophistication and to try to, express the idea that the internet is not necessarily just this huge benefit to mankind as it's often portrayed, but it's also has a sinister side, which I think we should think about when we're using it. Well, I don't think anything is in the USA is worse than it is in China. China is a tough place to live. It's definitely different, and for one thing, it's not as bad in China as it's often portrayed. The censorship. It's bad for journalists who criticize the government, which is bad for all of society. That's absolutely true. It's meant to be a book that shows how completely vulnerable we are to people when they have way more information than we do. Be that an individual who's a telepath or an individual or, a corporate or government entity that can track everything we do. We become completely vulnerable without privacy. And, I think that's really illustrated by the Chinese point of view, which is that they try to get you to censor yourself. All they really do to you now, if you start searching for something you're not supposed to know, is they cut your internet off. But nobody wants to have their internet continually cut off. And so they learn not to do certain things. They learn not to search for certain information. And once you've learned that lesson online, you also learn it in society. You learn it in your personal interactions. And you become a much more passive citizen. And you believe yourself to be more powerless. Mm-hmm. And so it's actually, even though it's very ham-handed and very old-school Soviet kind of system of control, it's very effective.
Mm. And about Snowden, why did you mention this real name? Because all the names are fictional, but...
They're all fictional, but they all have some historical significance. Yeah. So I think Snowden is a big part of what triggered the entire book, the Snowden revelations, and the sudden issue of the real, how vulnerable we've all become.
Your book is about the Alaska project. An
Yes.
Alaska project. Is it a total invention, or
Yes.
did you?
Yeah, it's still an invention, but you don't really need to invent much because it's pretty much everything in the book is something that has happened and can be proved. There's no conspiracy. There's no wild-eyed kind of the government calls 9/11 stuff. These are all things that have happened and been verified and been written about or discussed by journalists. It's virtually everything in the book. And also I spent a lot of time up in that area, up in northern Alaska, and I know what those bases are like and how removed and remote they are. There has to be something going on there, or else they wouldn't pay hundreds of millions of dollars to keep those bases open.
Would you agree with the idea that a novel is a way to warn us also about what's going on, to remind us we must be aware we are under watch? Or
yeah, that was really the point of it. It's like an awareness of how the internet could be used for sinister purposes. It's not just the internet, it's also cell phones. So they can turn your cell phone off and on. I've got a smartphone in my jacket pocket. They could be listening to this right now without our knowing it. And it sounds paranoid to say they, but It's the telecom company that owns provides the cell phone service. All the government has to do is ask the telecom company, and anybody can get the information coming through your cell phone. They can go all through the cell phone. They can see the last people I talked to, the last people I texted. They can find out what I'm saying right now. You know, they could do that.
Yeah,
If somebody else has that capability, it makes you vulnerable. It makes you have to behave in a certain way once you become aware of it.
yeah, and in your book, you can also talk through a television.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you can totally do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I didn't make that up. Yeah. When you stay in a 5-star hotel, those computers are nodes on a network. I mean, you can just the TVs are too.
Mm. And I wondered, what is your personal use of internet and your relationship to social medias? Are you afraid of that, or do you?
No, I'm not afraid of it, but I don't use it because I don't have much interest in it. I don't need to. I don't want to market books through social media. I just don't have that inclination, because it seems that once you start, it has to become a regular thing. You can't just do it once and be done with it, like writing a book. You know, you have to maintain. And I don't want to spend that much time maintaining or tweeting clever thoughts. I'd rather keep my clever thoughts and just write them in a book. So.
And your novel is a political novel in a way. Not in a way, but it's also a thriller, and it's in some ways science fiction, and it's difficult because it's science fiction because of telepathy.
Yeah.
But it's also today. So did you want to play with nowadays, the present, and the future? The future is today in a way.
Yeah, it takes place in the present. I mean, and basically everything that occurs in the book could happen, except for the science. Could already happen, except for the science fiction part. So, except for the telepathy part. So, I just use telepathy as an analogy for the government having the same power. Essentially, having all the information and being able to track people by, the information that they ask you for, and using that as a tracking tool, it's not much different than telepathy. So I just gave individuals the government's power, and that was the only way I could find from a literary standpoint to do it.
So for you, it's an allegory. It's not. You did not researches about telepathy. It's not.
No, I didn't really do much. I don't think I needed to. You just imagine a couple of facts about telepathy. I can hear people's thoughts, and then you just imagine the rest. It's not. I wasn't particularly interested in the neurological specifics of it.
Yeah, and you said it's an allegory for the way the government knows everything about us, but it's also an allegory of writing, because writers can see and say everything about their characters. So telepathy is something you know also as a writer. Do you understand?
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. Yeah, because you have complete control. But in a sense, when you write, you don't, because once you've created the characters, if the characters are to remain consistent, you lose control every time they have to behave in a consistent pattern. And if they don't behave in a consistent pattern, then the book becomes crap. And so you're not as powerful as you might imagine when you're the author and you've created this world. You can throw new characters in there and you can have them do a lot of things, so you definitely have a lot of power as far as that goes. But that's an interesting thought. I don't consider the writer's power over his characters, in my case anyway, to be sinister. So that's a major difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, the conversations are different because they're much freer. They're not limited by the exact thing that you've said. you're free to you can, essentially these characters, when they interpret one another's thoughts, they're interpreting thoughts before they went to language. And language really makes the thought very specific. But the fact that they can do it prior to the thought going to language means that they can do it internationally, and they don't have to just mind read people who can speak their same language.
So the book has a specific rhythm, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
It's very short and
it moves very fast,
yeah,
very quick pace.
Yeah.
Yes.
Was it a challenge for you to
No,
write?
I like that. It was when I realized that was going to be a benefit of writing about this particular subject. I was pleased because you can skip over a lot of detail, and you can just go right to thoughts and imagination and feelings and how they interact. Nobody has to express anything, and also nobody can be deceptive. So it's once you get a character who can't be deceptive, he's pretty easy to write because everything is right there. It's fun. I'd say it was a fun book to write.
Your readers will also find in this novel the main subjects of your work, because we spoke about telepathy and science fiction, but first of all, justice is a subject of this book. With Denny, a convicted murderer, and he has a death sentence on him. But we understand quickly he's not a bad guy, and that's very important in your work. And you talk about prison, about sentences.
Yeah, the criminal justice system is brutal, and it's basically brutality aimed at poor and working class people, and there's also a very strong racial aspect to it. And so, yeah, anybody who's ever been inside the criminal justice system knows this instinctively. They know that it's brutal and that it's designed to acquire money and suppress revolt in any form, suppress thought, and we're all supposed to accept it. And a role is played by all these TV shows that we're inundated with, these cop shows. There's a reason why half the shows on television are police dramas, and that's to promote the myth of the criminal justice system as being this force for good versus evil. But in fact, it's a force for social oppression, and it also serves the dual purpose of occasionally arresting people who are causing trouble, who are, murderers or rapists. It does that. But the price we pay is that it also arrests and murders in the U.S. anyway, people who either never had a chance or are occasionally innocent, people who speak up against the criminal justice system itself. And so, yeah, it absolutely has a dual function, and the major part of that function is to benefit the corporate elite.
And there's another main theme of the book. It's not in front of the book, but it's very important, I think. It's the way newspaper or some newspapers just write what the government wants to be written.
It's insane the way newspapers do this. If newspapers covered murders the way they covered wars, you'd have headlines like, man killed, and there would be no mention of the person who killed him. It's just completely vague nonsense. And it's the newspapers that got us involved in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. There's no reason for us to have gotten involved in either one. But they've been absolute, patriotic cheerleaders. And they've actively suppressed civil protest for everything. 200,000 people showed up at a protest against the war in the war in Iraq back in 2003. And the government, the newspapers didn't cover it at all. So if you can have nearly 250,000 people show up at a rally and have it be completely ignored by the press, then the press has a serious problem.
And it's difficult to speak about that because I don't want to say how the novel ends. But in the last page, there's an article about what happened,
Oh yeah.
and the reader of your novel knows it didn't appear this way.
Yeah.
So that's a way to say fiction is more real in a way than information.
Yes.
What we call information. Yeah.
That's another thing about the book, about the way everything is controlled. As our information becomes more and more controlled, it also becomes channeled through more and more bodies. You know, who paid for the newspaper that you're reading. It's easy to pick up a newspaper at an airport and read it, but what you have to know is who financed the fact that you have this thing in your hand right now. And that person obviously has a vested interest in you reading specifically what's written in there. Working for newspapers and magazines gave me a real sense of how the media actually work.
Your novel is also about lie. The word lie is very often in the pages, and how we lie to each other, and that's more important. How we are, I don't know how you write it in English, but natural born to believe.
Yeah.
The sentence is very moving, and do you agree with that idea? We want to believe something even if it's false, and lie is in the center of our existences?
Yeah, trust. I mean, I don't think that we'd come together and form societies unless we just had innate trust. We're not skeptical. We tend not to be skeptical of certain things. We're not skeptical of our leaders. We have to have a lot of trust in one another. And the downside of placing so much trust as part of our social contract is that it makes it very easy for leaders in society to completely manipulate us based on the trust that they have assumed because of their high position in society. And so, I mean, the Nazi Party in Germany, it's zero rationality, it's all trust. You know, there's this belief that your group is better, and it just comes from there. But that small segment of the population just has huge amount of trust and belief in their leaders above all. Mm. They place that above everything, and you're seeing it again. You know, before Nixon resigned, this is about 22-25% of the people will always believe anything someone in a position of authority says. Trust is a very important part of our psychological makeup.
I have a question about trust. You know the line for the United States, "In God we trust." When you talk about trust, about what people are told to think, told to do, and being watched by the American government. And you said that America and the American government has put too much God in their politics or in the way they want to guide people. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes, there's way too much religion in the United States right now. And it's funny because, you know, it looked like it was going out of style so quickly until about 1980, 1985, and then suddenly there was this huge resurgence of the religious right. And it's a very odd, first of all, it's an odd permutation of religion in general. It's very radical. It has nothing to do with the teachings of Jesus. It has nothing to do with Christianity. It's all about capitalism and acquisition. And it's extremely aggressive, and it's aggressive to the poor. You know, and where this movement came from, I just don't know. It's mystifying, and it has completely paralyzed the U.S. government now, because so many of the Republican congressmen are, you know, aggressively religious, and they talk about nothing but God. So I don't know what God they're talking about. I'm an atheist, but you know I've never seen this representation of God in any, you know, version of the Bible. So he's just a God who really wants you to buy things and earn money. I'm not sure what. That seems to be the only religion, and it's a very strange kind of warped and damaging for democracy development. not necessarily to make people skeptical, though I think skepticism is always a good thing, at least in certain doses, but to acknowledge levels of complexity as in social orders, and why is this person in charge? Why is this person in prison? Why, it's always more complex than you first think. And I think the entire purpose of media is to try to make it very simple. And the purpose of literature is to bring the complexity back and have you think about the things that you see every day.
Thank you for your answer, because my question was awful, but you
Oh, no,
understood what I wanted to ask. We said it's a thriller, it's a political book, but it's also a very funny book. The subject is scaring in a way, but it's very funny. We loved reading your book, and you play with the way a thriller would be written. There's a good cop and a bad cop and everything what we could expect, but you play with that. Was it important for you that it's still funny, that we can laugh about that? Is that a way to be free, to be...
I don't know how that works. It seems that every time I don't specifically start out to be funny, but sometimes, like the scene when he's in the bar with the singles bar, that it just seems like that would be a natural thing that would happen. If I suddenly found I could read minds, I'd go and try to pick up women. So that would probably be the first thing I'd think of. And so I thought, okay, here's this young guy, he suddenly finds he can read minds, so he goes to pick up women. And I thought, how would this play out? How would it develop? And the first thing that occurs to me is basically funny, and it just turns into a complete catastrophe for him. So these things, and it also serves the novel very well, because it shows that it's not exactly as how you would imagine it to be. So humor really works. It just seems to develop itself a lot of times. It serves that dual function. Yeah, it also, humor in a novel specifically about the subject is invaluable, because it makes it more readable. So the more you read, the more I can say, and then it keeps it going. It's definitely a good lubricant.